Hello folks, Hugh here from Mental Health, the podcast where we discuss the latest tools, the cutting edge research and the ancient practices to help you take back control of your emotional well-being. This is our fourth and final episode in the month-long deep dive on the topic of depression. So if you have not checked out the other episodes in this series, I'm talking about part one. I'm talking about part two. I'm talking about part three. I highly recommend and encourage you to go back and check it out. We don't get anything from it. It's not like, I have anything to gain from you going back. You have everything to gain. There is an unbelievable amount of content, an incredible amount of context that has been paving the way for this grand slam, big finish, the slam dunk season finale. I don't know, can I hype it up anymore? I'm not sure. But in all seriousness, like this fourth episode, Steve and I really go into what I think is the heart of depression. It's the heart, it's the core of the issue of what it feels like to experience it and the bullseye of the thing that has made the biggest impact in my own 15-year journey with depression. It's radically transformed my life. Like I can't express that enough. What Steve and I talk about today, these are things that I have done in my own life that have made a humongous difference. And it's the long game, dude. It's the bit nobody likes. We all want the quick fix. We want the miracle drug. But these are the long-term strategies. These are the essentials, the building blocks. I don't know what label I can put on this to convince you. But this is the antidepressant lifestyle. This is the way of being, the habits we can adopt, the practices we can deploy in our lives. And yeah, look, there's a few tools in there, There's a few hacks. It wouldn't be Mental Health Podcast with Steve Alardi if he didn't have a few up his sleeve. But we really talk conceptually about how do we manage depression? How do we manage relapses? Where do we find the strength to get up and go again when we fall down? What do we do whenever we find ourselves in that dreaded rut once again? And more importantly, we talk about what are the steps that we can take to experience full and lasting recovery. We all know prevention is better than the cure, and we talk a lot about the preventative measures and steps that we can all take to keep ourselves and our families not only safe from depression, but also to help us get out of it if we are currently experiencing it. So yeah, look, that's it. That's all I'm going to say. I feel like I've hyped it up enough. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all of the beautiful feedback you've given as part of this series. Some listener wrote in and described it as the missing piece of the puzzle, which is just so beautiful. And it means a lot. Thank you for sending messages like that to us. Mentalhealth.fm is the website if you'd like to do so. And yeah, that's it. I'm going to step out of the way and please welcome to your ears Hugh from the past, Steve from the past, as we embark on this fourth and final chapter in this wild depression exploration and journey that we've been on over the last few weeks. Enjoy. I feel like all my points are just kind of regurgitating or coming at the same point in many different ways. And I think it's because I believe in them so much, and these are the things that have really worked for me. I gave the analogy of a domino earlier, and I don't know if you've ever seen this thing, but there's this...
yeah.
It's not an idea, it's just a reality where it's a domino can knock over. I think it's another domino that's maybe 1.5 times heavier than itself.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So you can create this really hilarious chain reaction where it's something stupid a domino that starts off the size of a fingernail ends up knocking over the Empire State Building in something stupid 12 or 15 dominoes, right? It's outrageous. But I often think that with depression, it's these little domino effects in the short term when you're in the crisis that really make a difference. And I'm always encouraging people to find the smallest domino you can possibly knock over, because when we're depressed, we have very little willpower to do anything. We don't feel like doing anything. We have no, it seems, strength to even muster up and I've been there, standing on the landing, trying to really force myself into the shower and feeling like I don't even have the energy to do that. I hear you and I understand, but it's what's the smallest thing, what's the smallest action you can take that will give you that little bit of a lift that will take you to that next part of your day. And, again, what I'm about to say sounds really extreme, and I just want to caveat it by saying it's like something that you build up to, and it's something that you can integrate into part of your life as you go. But I just have to talk about cold water for a second, because it is something that is a really, really fast shortcut to go from feeling 3 out of 10 to even feeling like a 4 out of 10. And it takes about 30 seconds, if you finish that absolutely long shower with a little bit of cold, even just for like I said, 30 seconds or 1 minute, that, I don't know if it's a form of adrenaline, I don't know if it's dopamine, but whatever your body is doing in that moment, it gives you that little bit of a lift that you can move on to the next stage. And I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but I'll just slip it in kind of under 30 seconds. I'm such a big believer that all of us who are vulnerable to depression should have some form of a written kind of action plan for what to do whenever you go into a dip. And like I said earlier, that's really just to automate your actions. So you don't have to think. One of the things Steve mentioned at the start in part 1 was that one of the symptoms that we as depressed individuals experience is the inability to make decisions or sluggish thoughts. You've got these kind of slow faculties. And if you have a plan, and a plan can be as simple as, this is what my routine looks like. It's having 3 meals a day. These somewhat artificial constructions that get you from 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, that get you to 10 o'clock, they get you to 3 o'clock, they get you to your bed, getting another day, having a success under your belt so that next day you have that little bit of extra confidence or resilience to go and do it again. And, I am a big believer in having that written down. I'm a big believer in having that shared with your therapist and your spouse or anyone that you kind of live with who can kind of help hold you accountable in that. But even just for yourself, something that you can literally hold in your hand and say, okay, this is what I do now. And it's hard to create that when you're in the middle of a crisis. But I would just say the simple basics of getting out of bed, showering, making yourself look good, having 3 meals, literally is something just to do. I think you cannot underestimate how important those things are. And I think it's something that you're going to have to experiment with and troubleshoot. It sounds so simple, and I'm almost embarrassed going through things in this level of detail, but I hope it's just helpful for you listening, and that you can you see your own situation in it. But I just realized that having a shower as soon as I wake up when I'm depressed is not necessarily my best order for do things, because the shower would be a place I would end up getting stuck. I'd end up taking these 30-minute long warm showers, and then I would get kind of paralyzed. And then I'm like, whereas I realized, if the first thing you do is put your shoes on and go outside and go for a short walk, and then you come back and you do your breakfast, or you do, I don't know, even something like your shadow boxing, 5 push-ups, something literally just going through the motions, it's so much more helpful. And then I can go to the shower, and then, I can do the shower and I can do the cold bit at the end. So sometimes it's having a little bit of an experimenting mind. It's figuring out how to reorder things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. But anything to get going, anything to get out of bed, anything to get out of the danger zone, and leaning on some of those more healthy coping mechanisms instead of falling into some of those negative ones are just going to be it's for me, it's everything.
Yeah, that's so wise. A couple of things that jump right out at me with that, Hugh. One is, we've talked about this before, but when people are depressed, depression will turn off the circuits in the left prefrontal cortex that give us the ability to initiate new things, to initiate activity. Right. So when we're depressed, there are these dopamine circuits that come from deep in the brain all the way up to the left frontal cortex that are basically like, hey, this is how you can translate your intention into action. So people who are depressed might sit there and be like, oh yeah, I should do this, I should do X, I should do Y, but they can't make it happen. And they're like this cheesy commercial that used to be on the air in the US. It's like, I've fallen and I can't get up. It's like, I know what I need to do. I want to get up. It's like, I'm sitting on the sofa and I know what will help me, but I can't make myself get my butt up.
You cannot think, you just have to do. It's really hard to put into words, but you cannot think your way out of it. It's just impossible.
Exactly. And so what you've done, we've talked about this a little bit before, where sometimes it's really, really important to offload to a routine or to offload to the community.
Outsourcing your willpower to the environment.
Outsourcing your will. Yeah, thank you. And so it's a very similar dynamic with depression. People with depression have extremely low willpower, and that's part of the illness. It doesn't mean that they have a personality disorder. It means the illness has robbed them of their willpower and their initiative. So what do? Well, if we have written it all out ahead of time, preemptively, proactively, prophylactically, now I can lean on my routine, or I can lean on this piece of paper that outlines for me what I need to do. Now, I may also need to lean on somebody else in my life who can nudge me and remind me and say, hey, honey, hey, bro, like it might be a really good thing for you to get outside first thing in the morning. And notice, by the way, what that routine is. It's like, oh, I'm going to get outside. Well, that's bright light, which is going to have, we talked about rapid therapeutic effects, physical activity, rapid therapeutic effects, behavioral activation. Hey, guess what? Oh, there's my, take a drink, everyone. Guess what? I shouldn't joke about take a drink right after we've been talking about alcoholism.
Take a drink of water. Come on, Steve.
Take a drink of omega-3.
Don't wait. Hydrate, guys.
Yeah, thank you. So guess what? The more active we become while we're depressed, the more it nudges and stimulates those dormant initiation circuits back into action. In other words, the more we actually behave as if we have the ability to do things, the more the brain gets the memo and is like, oh, yeah. I'm going to get those circuits back online that allow me to be active and do things. So it is a kind of a use it or lose it situation with those circuits in the brain. The longer we stay inactive, the longer the brain circuits that will activate us are going to stay offline, and vice versa. So, really, really brilliant in so many different ways to have that routine in place, to have the break glass in case of emergency, checklist of things like, okay, I can lean into these. One last thing I wanted to say, this is kind of pivoting just a little bit into the fact that I'm going to circle back around to the role of inflammation in depression. So about 1 out of every 2 people who are battling depression have high levels of inflammation in their bodies and their brains. So it's like a subtype, right? It's not everybody with depression, but for the 50% of people with depression who have neuroinflammation, we got to get that inflammation under control. And we can wait for it to get under control indirectly while we tug on other threads in the spider web, right? So if we can just kind of get the person to de-stress and to quit ruminating, eventually the inflammation will resolve. But how about this? What if we go right into the teeth of inflammation with something that's going to bring it down really fast? Like what? Well, omega-3s, high dose omega-3s. Why do they work in depression? Because for a subset of people that have that inflammation, omega-3s are really nicely anti-inflammatory in the brain. There is another really interesting supplement that's been used in South Asia for a long time. It's derived from a spice called turmeric, which we see in like a lot of Indian cuisine. The anti-inflammatory derivative is called curcumin. And there, unfortunately, if we just eat a lot of turmeric or we take a curcumin supplement, it's probably not going to get into the brain very much because basically the liver is going to take it out of circulation really fast. But there is a new...
pesky liver.
I have pesky liver. Damn it, liver. Stop doing your thing. There's some evidence that if we take a lot of black pepper with the turmeric, that can help the liver not take it out of circulation, but that's not a good solution really for lots of reasons we don't have time to go into. So what do we do? Well, some researchers at UCLA came up with a formulation where they encapsulate the curcumin inside a little fatty capsule, lipid. It's basically a little lipid capsule. And so they patented it. It's not terribly expensive. There's a brand that I take sometimes called Curcubrain. I love that name, Curcubrain. And it's just an encapsulated form of curcumin that will make it into the brain and have a nice, rapid anti-inflammatory effect. There are also some, believe it or not, antibiotic medications that are really anti-inflammatory in the brain. So I guess that's redundant. They're anti-inflammatory in the brain, like minocycline and doxycycline, and they have been found to have some really nice antidepressant effects in rodent models and now even in some human studies. There's a lot of therapeutic interest in these drugs. And so, it's proof of concept that we might be able to move the needle on our suffering really quickly if we have inflammation, if we can do something that's anti-inflammatory.
Absolutely. And again, it all just comes back to what I keep saying. Like, if you are not following a routine whenever you're depressed, like let's just say you're not having breakfast or you're not having lunch, okay? I don't want to upset any intermittent fasters out there. Although as someone who does a lot of fasting, I would say when I am in a depressed state, having 3 meals a day as opposed to 1 or 2 that I would usually do is very helpful because it just gives me another crutch to lean on. It increases my surface area of routine. It gives me yet another opportunity to socialize and be with my family. All that stuff aside, having regularly scheduled meals are essential if you are going to take supplements, because with so many habits, if you don't get the meal, then you're probably going to skip your supplementation for that day, and you may miss out on engaging with some of that mental health toolkit that you've built up, say to take omega-3 or to take your curcumin or whatever it is that Steve mentioned. So again, I just come back to this idea of it's so important to have a routine. It's so important to have a kind of structure to lean on whenever you feel like the rug's been pulled out from underneath your feet. The other thing I will say is like that piece of paper that Steve talked about, I kind of had this picture in my head of the depressed person waking up and holding their piece of paper and looking at this piece of paper and being like, nah, because that's the feeling that you have. And so your piece of paper is important, but a piece of paper in isolation is not going to save you. What's going to save you is having accountability measures in place to make that piece of paper into a concrete reality in your life. So we talked way back in the 3rd episode of this podcast. We had a really interesting conversation all about social connection and how do we build community in the age of social distancing. And we talked a lot about that kind of like social accountability and having these regularly scheduled appointments in place as a really useful way to, interact with people that we love, but also as this like preventative, protective measure. And I would also say that I don't necessarily know how to say this, so I'll just jump off the cliff and figure out how to land it later on. Have you ever heard the phrase, summer bodies are built in the winter?
No, but I love it.
Okay, well, I'm trying to find a way to invert that. And I feel like with depression, like so much of your healthy coping mechanisms should be and are effectively put in place whenever the sun is shining, so that when the winter comes, you just keep doing what you always do. And so as we move into like kind of like the more long-term lifestyle changes, that's the power that I really see in them. Is you may say, okay, I'm depressed, there's no way in hell I'm taking a cold shower. But if every single shower you take for the next 3 years has a cold finish at the end, there's that weird part of habit that will just almost do it automatically. Like, I think I've broken myself. It's not possible for me to take a warm shower and not end cold anymore. I almost feel like something's incomplete because it's just so programmed into me. And I feel like, if you have, say, like a dog, and the first thing you do is you wake up and you take the dog outside, go to the toilet. If you build that into your life, whether you're depressed or not, you have to take the dog out. Like, what's the solution? You're either going to take the dog out or you're going to have to clean up some pee or poo later on in the house. You know what I mean? It's like a forcing function that gets you out of the house. Or if every single Monday at 6:30 p.m. you go for a run with your best friend, like, it's hard to wiggle out of that whenever that's just part of your life. And you may show up to that and be like, look, I really don't feel like running. But at least maybe you go for a walk, or at least grab a coffee and have a chat with somebody. Do you know what I mean? So if we have these regular things in place, it makes it way harder to wiggle out of some of these protective and preventative measures whenever that depressed feeling comes, that depressed state comes where you don't want to do anything and you don't feel like engaging at all. So I don't know where I'm necessarily going with this, but as we move into this long-term section here, this is what we're talking about. These are long-term lifestyle changes that won't necessarily make you bulletproof, but they'll certainly get you closer to it in terms of living a life that is antidepressant by nature, that will not only help prevent you from getting depressed, but will be a really tranquil, comfortable set of practices that you can fall back on whether you're depressed or you're not.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so beautifully put. And so, there's that metaphor that I think probably gets overused a little bit, but somebody who's at the top of a snowy mountain and they got the snowball that's just a little tiny snowball, and you start rolling it down the hill, and the further it goes, the larger it gets, and the more momentum, the more mass, the more speed, the more force. And early on, you can stop it. But once it gets to a certain point, it's got so much momentum, it's going to keep rolling, right? And depression is very much like that. And so, as we've said, anyone who's been depressed is, well, for that matter, any of us, whether we've been depressed or not, we are going to occasionally have things happen that are going to be like that snowball that's going to start rolling a bit, right? So last year, my dog died, and it was really painful for me. And for a week or two, I was off my game, and I was crying. I was sad. It interrupted my sleep a bit. And so the snowball rolls a bit, but if we have all of these healthy protective habits in place, they are going to pick that snowball up or put a barrier there in place so that it stops before it gets intractable and takes us all the way into a full-blown episode. Now, having said that, many people, if they are now in the grip of a full-blown episode, they are going to be like Sisyphus trying to roll that sucker back up the hill by themselves. They're going to need help. They cannot do it on their own. Now, some people can, but Hugh, when my research group was first developing our therapeutic lifestyle change program for depression, which is built on this platform of 6 modifiable lifestyle changes, we had a lot of enthusiasm in the community. A lot of my doctor friends saw a locally produced TV series that we did on therapeutic lifestyle change. Yeah. And so they started, I learned about doctor colleagues of mine that would literally get out their prescription pad. And instead of reaching for a prescription of Prozac for their patients, they'd be like, okay, well, why don't you start hey, you need to start exercising aerobically 3 times a week, and you need to start, changing your diet in these specific ways, and you need to start getting outside in sunlight for X amount of time, And so they're basically like writing a prescription for 6 different lifestyle changes and handing it to the patient and being like, okay, yeah, good luck with that. And I ended up going back to a lot of these colleagues and saying, look, I love what you're doing in the sense of bringing to patients' attention the fact that many of these things can actually really powerfully be a force for healing with their depression. But for a lot of depressed patients, this is actually unintentionally quite cruel.
Yeah.
It's cruel to just hand them a sheet of paper and say, start doing this stuff, because the depression is going to keep them from being able to do that stuff.
Bro, sorry.
And so
I was in a men's group one time. It was like an accountability thing, a little bit like AA. And one of the guys, like very, very well-meaning, like turned around and was trying to give like some really encouraging advice and just accidentally like fumbled and was just like, you just need to like, I don't know, like, you just need to be better. And we were all like, dude, what the heck? But that's kind of what it's like. If the doctor's like, oh, hi, depressed person, it's like, you need to go and you need to run 3 times a week. You're like, how do you internalize that as a depressed person is not necessarily going to be like, oh, thanks, doc, appreciate it.
Right, because, for a lot of depressed patients, what they're hearing is, okay, so basically first assume that you are no longer depressed and now do all these things.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, but we can't assume that I'm not depressed. So when we first started putting together the therapeutic lifestyle protocol, a lot of colleagues and a lot of other people were just like, oh yeah, this is great, but these are all the things you can't do when you're depressed. And my retort was, no, these are things you cannot initiate easily when you're depressed. But as long as you've got somebody else there, if you can outsource your willpower to someone else, whether it be a psychotherapist, a trained clinician, or just somebody else in your life, then these are things that anyone can do while they're depressed. And we proved it. We've run through this program with hundreds of patients. So people can do these things while they're depressed, but they very, very, very often will need one or more people to join them in solidarity and partnership and compassion, and not to be a nag, but just to be part of their healing process. Now, if we have, Hugh, just as you just said, if we have in place a set of habits that are going to ideally stop that snowball from rolling down the hill, that's going to be incredibly protective. Now, what I will say, because we talk a lot on the show about the food-mood relationship, the role of diet and supplements and nutrition in brain function and psychological well-being. The big mantra, the big rule of thumb that we keep coming back to is supplements are a kind of break glass in case of emergency thing, right? Supplements are intended primarily as a short-term solution for most of us. Ideally, we want to have healthier diet. So long-term, we don't need to lean on the supplement. So even when it comes to inflammation, right, it's like, oh, okay, well, we can take fish oil capsules at a really high dose to get all kinds of anti-inflammatory omega-3s. But long-term, if we cut inflammatory foods out of our diet, like, well, what, ultra-processed carbs, sugar, lots of sugars at least, ultra-processed fats, junk food, fast food, if we cut that stuff mostly out of our diet, if we have lots of healthy vegetables and fruits and whole grains, then and we just eat a lot of cold water fish, then we don't need to lean on the supplement. And that's going to be true, I think, for a lot of these. When we're thinking about long-term strategies, they're not necessarily exactly the same things that we're going to break out if we're actually fighting an episode of depression, but many of them are going to be helpful.
Yeah. And again, like, just to be clear, this is the long-term game plan department of the podcast, where we're talking about treatments that we can kind of weave into the lifestyle. So I say that to caveat what I'm about to say. Something that I have found to be very, very beneficial is to really address my relationship with sugar. And I know that is a highly sensitive topic for all of us because we love sugar. It tastes great. It's in so much of our food, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we consume just a tremendous amount of it. And so I just want to interject at this point and just flag, if you've been battling depression for a while, and if it's something that you've had multiple episodes of, I would just encourage you just to, as Steve said, check out sugar and white carbs, especially, because I've found that it's made a big difference. Also, whenever these things are, let's say, managed in our everyday healthy, non-depressed lives, I think it creates some really healthy boundaries that prevents us from reaching for these things when we are in a depressed state. Because, as Steve mentioned in a previous episode, our craving for white carbs and sugar can often go through the roof whenever we are depressed. And if you have tackled your relationship with them when you are healthy and you are well, it can keep you safe from those intense cravings, which I personally believe, Steve's not endorsing this, I think can actually make us worse in the moment whenever we are depressed. But again, that's a topic for another time.
Well, it turns out, I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but we're going to put this in the show notes now. There was a recent paper a review paper called The Depressogenic, which means basically the depression-causing role of dietary sugar.
Oh.
And I know about this paper because I helped to write it.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, it's a flex. Oh,
Go ahead.
God.
One of my many papers in my academic career.
Yeah, one of a small handful of papers, but I felt really, I was kind of proud of that paper. Cool. Because it was like a tour de force kind of overview of like 6 different ways that excessive dietary sugar for some people can really trigger depression or can make it worse, can build our risk for it. So yeah, absolutely. By the way, one of the hidden ways that sugar can contribute to depression is it is like rocket fuel for growing really toxic microbes, unfriendly microbes in the gut that know how to hack the brain.
You just love to hear that, don't you? That's just the sort of thing you enjoy hearing.
Yeah, we're losing listeners in droves today, I'm afraid, my friend. But yeah, yeah. And by the way, I'm not like a sugar Nazi. Can I say that? I'm not. It's like I recognize that a little bit of sugar here and there is a wonderful addition to an enjoyable life. But we have to recognize, I mean, the average American consumes about 22 teaspoons worth of sugar every day.
What?
Added sugar. 22, yeah.
Over 100 grams of sugar?
It's a lot. Yeah.
Oh my days.
I believe it's well, for adults it's only, I'm going to put only in scare quotes, only about like maybe 70 grams a day, but it's
well, that's fine.
Yeah. And like, the American Heart Association has been like, hey, you know what, people, like, why don't you maybe just try to limit it to like 25 grams a day of added sugar?
That's just added sugar, dude.
Like,
wow.
That's added. Yeah. So like, that's not counting like your
bananas,
your glass of orange, your banana, your glass of orange juice, your, whatever. It's added. So yeah, it turns out that we can actually feel better, usually, if we can really profoundly limit sugar. Again, some people probably are going to do better if they just cut it out entirely. Let's be honest. A lot of people are addicted, like literally addicted to added sugar.
Yeah, in every sense of the word.
And so, in every sense of the word, it is highly addictive for some people. And so maybe a more realistic short-term goal is just to get it down to a level that's not going to be toxic. So that's something to look at for sure for people who have a vulnerability to depression.
For sure. And again, this may be TMI, but something I like to include in my action plan. We should do an episode actually on like how to write a personalized mental health treatment plan. And we could include like, these are like what some routines look like. These are the toolkits you're going to use. Like all the way down to even just like, these are the playlists I'm going to listen to get me out of the house. Like I would love to go and do like a deep dive on this sort of stuff. But I think a helpful thing to include in that is like a meal plan as well. Because again, like when you're depressed, like your life still has to go on. Like you still have to buy groceries. Most of us still have to go to work or navigate that whole work scenario where how do you take time off? Can you take time off? What does it look like? Blah, 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 blah. And like the more you can automate, the better. So if you even have like, this is what a meal plan looks like. I know what I'm cooking for my breakfast. I know what I'm cooking for my lunch. I know what I need to order from whatever supermarket you go to or wherever you get your food. Again, I know I've said this so many times in this episode, but I just find it so helpful to have those things in writing, in stone, so I can fall back on them. And, in theory, these are going to be healthy meals that we eat all the time. We know how to cook. They're going to be fast. They're going to be simple. There's not, you don't have to push the boulder up the hill just to sort something basic like your meals, which is often what it feels like when you're in the middle of a depressive episode.
Absolutely. We should probably also talk just a little bit about habits of healthy sleep. Talk about sleep. Why? Because, sleep is a foundation for our well-being. We've mentioned in previous episodes, during sleep, the brain is recharging itself. It's replenishing itself. It's charging up the energy in our brain cells to allow them to function at a high level during the day. And it's also clearing away the buildup of waste products and toxins that over time, if they accumulate, they can really do some damage. So if we're chronically sleep deprived, we're damaging the brain. I mean, we really are. And we're definitely not going to be hitting on all cylinders. And the single biggest mental performance enhancing drug that we can take is regular, healthy, adequate quantity sleep.
Boom.
I mean, just getting, boom.
There's a soundbite if I've ever heard one. That's epic.
Oh, that's going up on, what do the kids use? TikTok. Yeah, that's like a good But we got to record that. Yeah, it turns out that if we could just get a good, for the average person, there's some variation, but let's just say a good 8 hours of high quality sleep, because we have habits of healthy sleep. Like what? We go to bed roughly the same time every night. We get up roughly the same time every day. And by the way, if you have really good sleep, I'm going to knock on wood here, as I do, most of the time, I can violate some of these principles every now and again and get away with it. But for the most part, you want to go to bed at the same time every day, get up at the same time every day, use the bed only for sleep. Don't sleep out in the living room on the Barca lounger or whatever. Don't be on your screens in bed.
What the heck is a Barca lounger? What is that?
It's something every American's grandparents have, this ugly recliner sitting out. It's just like a hideous.
Oh, that sounds
I think. Yeah.
See, our grandparents had rocking chairs. I know you guys have rocking chairs over there. Like I've seen them in movies on porches and stuff. But
yeah.
No,
this is an oversized, hideously ugly recliner.
Nice.
that would sit in the middle of the living room. It would have some horrifically garish upholstery. And anyway, it's just.
I'm picturing like cream tartan, like cream background,
yeah,
with
that
like
would work.
red
Totally
and
work.
green lines down it. Yeah. Sounds good.
Anyway, they're great for a nap, but like, maybe I should say like your sofa or whatever. Anyway, habits of healthy sleep turn out to be like crucially important for our long-term well-being, and adequate quantity, adequate quality. We'll take a deep dive on this sometime soon, but in the meantime, we can put some links in the show notes, I think, for folks. This will be a pretty good show note link episode, I think.
Cool.
But I definitely want to talk about healthy sleep there.
Yeah. Can I break character and be really dogmatic for a second?
Yeah, what the hell? Yeah, go for it.
Do not have screens in your bedroom. Honestly, like if there's one, like I do a lot of work with young people, I do a lot of work with teenagers, and I always say, like, if there's one thing I can beg you to do, it's please just make your bedroom be a screen-free zone. Like, for the context of today, like talking about depression, yes, but just for so many reasons in your life, even just for the fact that like you deserve to have a little bit of headspace in your day-to-day life where we're not plugged into the matrix, where we're not absolutely bombarded and overwhelmed and sucked into this weird digital world we find ourselves in. Like, please, like, buy a really cheap alarm clock. You can get them for like $5 on Amazon. Like, you do not need a phone inside your room. You do not need a TV. I understand it's comfy. I understand it feels good. I understand it's really nice at the end of the day to unwind. But it is just one really, really simple thing that you literally could do like while you're listening to the rest of this podcast that would have immeasurable impact on your life over the next 60 years. Like, what it would do to your relationships. Anyway, I'm going to stop and get off the soapbox, but that's all I'm going to say for now. Like, please do it for yourself, because you literally deserve it and you're worth it. And advertisers get enough of your time without you also scrolling through and filling your brain with so much stuff when you're supposed to be having that invaluable downtime, that rest time. So please, if I have any sort of like relational currency in your life after listening to this podcast for a while, like, please just consider doing it. Not even that, please just do it. There you go, rant over.
Soapbox. Wow. Yeah, thank you. Totally not a rant at all. That was awesome. That was epic. Yeah, speaking of recurrent themes, we got to talk a little bit about therapeutic lifestyle. We've alluded to it many times already, but basically, if we accept the premise that the modern lifestyle is toxic, so, what are we talking about? Being sedentary, being indoors, being sleep deprived, being having diets replete with lots of fast food and junk food, all of the things, screen addicted, frenzied. If that's toxic, then basically, as Hugh said earlier, we need to do the opposite. We need to take our lifestyle seriously. We need to build a foundation, basically, of lifestyle medicine, where we are living a depression cure. We're living in many ways, we're importing into the modern world some of the healthy habits of the past, of our ancestors, weaving them into the fabric of day-to-day life.
Dude, it's like we said at the top of every show, it's the ancient practices. Do you know what I mean? Like, your great grandparents didn't go on TikTok like before they went to bed, because they couldn't. You know what I mean? And like the impact that had on their sleep. They didn't even have light bulbs. Like, it got so dark. Like, I don't know if you've ever been camping for an extended period of time.
Oh,
like, if you're out there and the sun goes down, you get hella sleepy, hella fast.
Yeah, it's true. And and there's so many little like soothing things that turn down our stress response when we're camping. We're, just the sounds of nature, being immersed in natural beauty, hearing the sound and the sights of a roaring fire at night, being in the clan, being in the tribe. I mean, just so many, and just, being in sync with the rhythms of nature. That's the world we're designed for. Now, obviously, we don't live in that world anymore, but we can still appropriate some of the most powerful healing elements of it, and we can avoid some of the most toxic elements of 21st century life. I love living in the 21st century, like, full true confessional, full disclosure, I would not choose to live in any other time believe it or not, than right now, because I believe we can have the best of both worlds. And so that's really what we're aiming for. We'll have some links in the show notes. I've done a couple of YouTube things online that really kind of break down what we're talking about with therapeutic lifestyle. I've got a book called The Depression Cure. I don't know if you've heard of it. We've only mentioned it about 20 times already on the pod. I'm not here to sell books, but I do think it really helpfully unpacks a lot of the things that we've talked about, and many, like at this point, thousands of people have contacted me who've read the book and have found it beneficial. So, I mean, it's incredibly humbling, gratifying just to know, like, hey, we're putting a message out there that I think is really resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah, Steve's been too humble, so let me just step in here. Like, this is a best-selling book. Like, it has done serious numbers. It's touched people's lives all over the world, including this guy right here. Like, the only reason this podcast exists is because I read Steve's book. It made a profound impact on my life, and I reached out to him, and the rest, as I say, is history. So, I really wanted to plug this book in this podcast because there's only so much we can cover here. And when I say a plug, like, books are the cheapest form of life change I feel like you can possibly get. And, Steve goes into incredible detail while keeping it super punchy and entertaining. It's a short book. You can plow through it in no time. But he goes into real detail on, like, actual prescriptive amounts for some of the things we talked about today, whether it's omega-3 or whether it's, how much should you use a light box? What does that even look like? How much exercise should we get? And so if after listening to this episode, you're like, look, I enjoyed what I heard today, but I want a list. I want things that I can kind of track. I want things that I can clearly see in front of me in black and white. Pick up the book. I got it on Kindle. You can, obviously get a paperback or whatever, but yeah, it's definitely something that I would encourage you guys to check out because it made such a big impact on my life as well. So I would like to redeem myself for my rant earlier. I'd like to give something a little bit more, like emotionally warm and like tender as we wrap up. Is that okay?
That's totally on brand for you.
Yeah, I gotta redeem myself, So I've shared it before on the podcast, so I'll kind of keep it brief, but it's a metaphor that I've just found unbelievably helpful over the years. And, it's this idea of a spiral staircase, because so often in life, whether it's battling something like addiction or battling something like depression, you can just feel like it's Groundhog Day. You can just feel like you're living the same day on repeat over the course of weeks or months, or in some cases, even years. And, you hear people saying that they're just stuck in a loop, where they feel like they're going round and round in circles. And I have been there. I have spent years of my life like that. And a real simple little kind of paradigm shift was this idea of a spiral staircase where you are going round and round and round, but you're also moving up or you're also moving down. And having an open mind and having just a real insatiable curiosity about yourself, about your body, about your own depression, what works, what doesn't work. Like this idea that there's never a point where you've turned over every stone. Like before I read Steve's book, I had just accepted this is just the way my life is. I've tried everything, quote unquote, and this is just it. And then, I stepped into the Alardi universe, and now I feel like I know hardly anything. I feel like I know 1% of what I'll know, even whenever I'm 40 or I'm 50. And every time you go round that cycle, every time you experience a depressive episode or whatever it is, you learn something new every single time. That's my experience anyway, but only if you keep your mind open. In storytelling, like there's this lovely kind of archetype that gets repeated over and over again of like the hero going down into the belly of the beast or the hero going into the dark cave. And the completion of that story arc is every single time they come up with a bit of treasure. They come up with something new. And my depressive episodes, as much as I despise them, as painful as they are, as much as they can make me feel like I'm back to square one in my life, I always come up learning something new about myself, a new measure or something to tweak in the treatment plan, or I discover in my desperation like something that I haven't tried before and I discover something that works. And if you have that mentality, it just redeems that pain, it redeems that suffering, and it gives you that ability to spiral upwards. And I do believe, like, for myself and for you listening, like, not to sound too inspirational, but like, I do believe in a future where all of us can kind of get to the top of that staircase. I also believe, like, there'll be times where we take a few steps backwards, and that's fine. The key is to keep moving up that spiral staircase. You're not stuck in a loop. There is forward motion, but you have to get back in the arena. It's fine, totally fine to lose a battle. It's totally fine to get knocked off your feet, but you have to get up again and keep trying, because it's the only way that we can move forward, and I believe that we all can. So at the end of that very like political sounding rant, can I just ask Steve, like, what is the superpower for the depressed individual? And for anyone who hasn't been tracking with this whole 101 series, it's a theme that we've come back to time and time again, is what is the superpower attached to this mental disorder? And I know it's actually borderline insulting for some of you listening to even have that mentality, but again, we're looking to turn things on their head. We're looking to see the opportunity in these disorders, in these crises, whatever it is. Like, is there something in your experience or something you've observed, Steve, that the depressive type, the depressive individual, is there a flip side to the coin that you think is actually a superpower, or something that can be useful for the tribe that they find themselves a part of?
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I really emphasize a lot when I talk about depression is suffering. And to me, suffering, emotional pain, and sometimes even physical pain, because, as we've talked about many times, people who are depressed will say it feels like torment, physically as well as emotionally. I think that focus on suffering is so key to understanding exactly what depression is all about from the inside. And what happens when somebody has been through suffering and then come out on the other side of it, and now they've experienced relief, they've experienced healing, they've experienced some redemption, it often gives them an uncanny level of radar, as it were. In other words, it gives them an uncanny radar for other people who are walking in that dark place that they've been before, an uncanny radar to pick up on the suffering of others. So here's the thing. A lot of people with depression who are really, really hurting, they get pretty good at hiding it from others, at kind of putting on their normal face, their normal facade. Now, it takes a lot of energy. It takes enormous energy, usually, for somebody who's depressed to be kind of like, okay, well, I got to do this thing, and I'm going to be around people. I'm not going to let them see my pain for all kinds of reasons. So, a lot of people will be oblivious. And then, sometimes you'll have somebody with depression even who ends up hospitalized or ends up like really, really in a bad place. And like people in their lives who see them every day are like, oh my God, I had no idea. But if someone has been depressed before, one of their superpowers is incredible radar for the suffering of others, and concurrently with that, extraordinary compassion.
Yeah. Extraordinary compassion.
And so this sense of mission, sense of calling, a sense of duty to like, hey, I see the need, I see the pain, and I want to be that friend who doesn't give up, that friend who is just an anchor and rock solid. And even though, my depressed friend has ghosted me and they're not replying to my texts and they're always turning down everything I initiate for the last month, like, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to let them know, like, hey, I get it, and I'm here for you, and like, I don't need anything from you. I just want you to know, like, I love you and I care. It's an incredible superpower that we often see.
Absolutely. I would build on that slightly, to like affirm what you said. Like, the people that I feel most naked around whenever I'm going through a hard time are recovered addicts and people who have recovered from like really extreme depression, say to the point of suicide. Because I feel like you just cannot hide from those people. They just see straight through the mask because they've been so used to wearing it for, so many years in their own lives, and you just can't kid those people. And I love what you said, like, about like this idea of like mission, because, there's a quote I love like about trauma, and it says, hurt people hurt people. And I also believe in the inverse of that. Like, I believe that healed people also have the potential to help other people heal themselves. you know, and I think,
Absolutely.
or there's something that flies around in the addiction community where it's like free people. And, you know, it's not that you have the power to change other people's lives, but it's like, you know, when you have to just show up at the front door and just keep knocking until you get an answer. Or you know that just because someone blows you off, you don't take it personally. You can kind of see what the meaning is behind that. And for the superpower for depression, like I kind of bring it back to this idea of like a sensitivity. I think that I heard Jerry Seinfeld in an interview one time actually talk about his depression, and he was saying that, you know, there's a lot of like unhealthy myths around, you know, the cursed artist, or the, you know, this kind of archetype of the tortured genius when it comes to mental health, and particularly with things like depression and bipolar. But he says he does believe that it is just kind of like part of the toolkit that you're given, that if you're incredibly sensitive and incredibly creative and incredibly intuitive, and you're able to experience, you know, all these different emotions and heightened things in your life, then the flip side of that is you also experience the negative. I kind of think about it almost like a menu where, you know, if you're a sensitive individual and you've been blessed with that superpower, you can taste things that aren't on the menu. And some of those things are really, really incredible, delicious things that your steady, loyal, steadfast kind of friends and family, they don't ever get to taste because they're kind of in that middle zone. But as part of that as well is there's some of the dark side of the menu that you will taste as well. There's extreme emotion that maybe a lot of people in your life can't relate to that you experience. But I do think it's both sides of the spectrum, and you cannot have one without the other. It's not to say that you have to suffer. It's not to say that artists are doomed to live this life. I totally push back against that as a creative person myself, and I know that my best work is whenever I'm healthy, and I don't believe that people should draw from that unhealthy place. But there is something to be said about that, the superpower sensitivity, the ability to dial in with how other people are feeling. And I think even like, as a conversationalist, it's something that I draw on all the time, is you can see and read people so well that you know where to explore, where not to explore. I imagine so many therapists have this sensitivity gift and have battled their own journey with some sort of a mental health thing, because it makes them so highly attuned to what their clients are going through, and they know exactly what buttons to push, exactly where to go to kind of lead someone through a helpful and a healing discussion. So that would be a lot of different thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, that was so well put. And there definitely is a lot of mythology around the relationship between mental illness and creativity. The only thing I would say about that is I really do want to validate that people who have been down to the pit of despair and have healed from it have a type of perspective on the human condition.
Oh, for sure.
A type of groundedness that they can then draw on if they have the courage to go back. And I don't mean to get back down, phenomenologically back into the pit, but just the empathic identification with like, oh, I remember what that torment was like. And now I'm going to write a song about it. Or I'm going to write a book about it, or a poem, or, whatever the thing is. I think it's really, really powerful.
For sure. Cool. Well, that is everything we have to say about depression for now. I mean,
no,
I feel like
for now. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like there's about 8 more hours of content in here, and about 6 more books we could
have
write.
No idea.
Whenever you said, what did you say earlier? You said something like, like food mood. I was like, dude, there's a book title in there somewhere, like mood food. Like, there's some sort of nutritional book in there that's just trying to peek its way up through the consciousness. But
yes, Hugh's being funny because there's a friend of the podcast, the legendary Australian researcher Felice Jacka, who wrote a book called The Food Mood Connection. She has the Food Mood Center. We'll put it in the show notes. There literally, I'm gonna for the next couple days, I'll be spinning 10 hours worth of additional content around in my noggin, but we'll get to it eventually.
Absolutely. So yeah, look, this, believe it or not, oh my word, I can't actually believe I'm about to say this. This wraps up our 101 series for now. And I'll do another 4 now. We've kind of teased probably about 50 million other 101s that we're going to do. Well, that's like a little tick of ours, I think, is like, how many future episodes do we come up with like in the middle of a recording? I think it's like an infinite library where every one podcast we record, we suggest like, yeah, we're going to do like these other 10 episodes down the line. So I don't know how
Have you noticed that?
I don't know how we're ever going to cover it, but definitely I'm dying to do Bipolar 101. We really want to do something to do with eating disorders, and the whole 101 series. It's so flexible because you could sneak a whole bunch of other stuff in there. We talked about panic disorders, like it's literally so many things.
PTSD for sure, trauma, PTSD.
Absolutely. But for now, we are going to change gears slightly. We're going to switch to a different mini-series and get into some of the tools that we've been kind of teasing for a long time. We're going to do the deep dive on specific aspects that we believe should be in everybody's mental health toolkit. These are things that may include, but are not necessarily limited to, omega-3 and exercise and sleep and diet and nutrition, and the list goes on and on and on. But these are the most important foundational blocks we believe you should really at least have on your radar for dealing with any mental disorder that you're experiencing, or indeed just building a stronger, more resilient, healthier, and if I can even use this word, happier life. That will make a difference in our day-to-day and for our families and for the generations that will follow us. So other than that, just want to say, like, genuinely thank you so much for spending this time with us. We have really enjoyed doing this 101 series. If you haven't checked out all the episodes in the series so far, I do encourage you to go back. We've covered ADHD, we covered addiction, we covered anxiety. Now we've obviously done depression. And, if you've joined us for that whole ride, like, we really hope it was beneficial to you. We hope that even if you don't experience all of those disorders, and I certainly hope no one experiences all of them at the same time, we hope that they have been really beneficial to give you an insight into the world that they live in, and maybe some of the things that you can do to come alongside them. So we have a Q&A episode coming up really soon. If you would like to sneak a question in just before we record that, we're going to get to that next week. So there is still time to submit a voice question on our website, which is mentalhealth.fm. I would also like to give a plug to our Patreon community. And the whole kind of idea on that is that, as you've heard, we don't run ads on the show. There is no kind of commercial sponsorship attached to the show because we believe in editorial integrity. We don't want to have to be, God forbid, we would never do this, but, we don't want to be promoting like some sort of drug that we don't believe in. We don't want to be promoting any sort of drug, period. If we didn't make that clear.
Wait, Hugh, are you saying that we are not actually in the pocket of big fish oil? That we're not in the pocket?
You know what? Big fish oil.
Light box.
I would be open to big light box or big fish oil reaching out. I don't think I would just flat out not be open for big pharma. I would be like, guys, you just don't get it. You don't get what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, I get questions not infrequently about like, oh, hey, Dr. Alardi, there was this study about like, maybe fish oil had this side effect, or maybe fish oil wasn't effective, or, whatever. So honestly, I love our complete independence and the integrity that comes with just like, look, if we're telling you that something could be beneficial, it's because that is our good faith take on the evidence, and we have no financial conflict of interest whatsoever.
That's such a good point, because what I love about you is like, you're not precious about your life's work. And what I mean by that is like, if a landmark study was published tomorrow about like how omega-3 is the worst thing ever, like, you would have no problem renouncing like your stance on stuff. Like, if the facts change, like, you change your mind. I think you quoted that in a previous episode.
Oh, it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. When the facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do, sir?
So good. But
it's like we're never going to double down. We're always going to try to follow the evidence wherever it leads.
That's true. And
always.
Like, a fact of the show is that we rely on the generosity of listeners like you. Who pledge, some people pledge a little bit, some people pledge a lot, but all of that helps us combine. You throw it all in the one pot. It helps us continue making the show free for people all over the world. And if you would like to join our private community, you can do so at patreon.com/mental health podcast. And I don't do this every time, but like, the Patreon model is simply this. If there's enough people who believe in a project and support it financially, then they can make it a reality. They don't have to rely on, getting picked up by like a big network or having like 20 billion listeners every single episode. Projects like ours not only can survive, but can actually thrive with a really small core dedicated listenership who really believe in what we're doing and want to support it. So if that sounds like you, if that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, or you would even like access to exclusive content and early releases of episodes, the chance to connect with the community and us in a more intimate way, again, patreon.com/mental health podcast.
Can I just say just one thing about that? I mean, just to give people a sense of, what Hugh's talking about is if we had a community of 2,000 patrons, 2,000 people, that's, in the digital age, this podcast is going out all over the world. If we had 2,000 people that are like, yeah, I'm willing to donate to keep this quality content available, like the amount that it would cost for a price of a mocha latte or something every month, that would make this sustainable for both of us to cover all the production costs, all of the, every cost associated with it, to keep it commercial free for the duration. And that's our vision. That's our hope. So you can really make a difference. You might think, oh, I'm just one person. It's just one cup of coffee. But, if you're part of a small little band of folks that really want to stand with us, you can make this a reality for the long term.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you want me to cut this bit, Steve, but, Steve and I have made a commitment to do this for 6 months, and we would just absolutely love to keep on doing it. Like, we love it. The feedback we get, the emails we get, the reviews we get are just unbelievable. And so, we would like to see this project continue, and we'd like to see it continue indefinitely. And what I will say is, if you don't have the means to support us, the show is free. Like, we literally make this show for you. But for people who have the means and have the desire, you can keep it free for people, and you can keep it going for not just yourself, but for everybody. So yeah, I like the model. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's a model we're going to see more of as we move away from kind of like the big Hollywood style overnight success model and into more of like this kind of independent creative economy that I really see us already moving into.
Yeah. So we are so grateful for all of you. We do this for all of you, and it's a labor of love, and we're having a blast. I hope you can tell that we're having a great time. We're really grateful for this platform. And that's really all we have for you this week. So look, we've been yammering on for a long time. So without further ado, I just want to wish you all a fantastic week, and we look forward to joining you again next time.